in 1949. It was very clear to them that we had a group of people that had to be governed by these laws. It was regulation of the hinterland. That's how we regulate the hinterland. And I believe that time is now. We have to evolve one mosaic as a nation. Time is now that we confront that challenge to be able to deal with the details of these laws. That is what I was talking about when I talked about the two-tier system. Because then we had different system for the hinterland, we had different system for the people in Monrovia. Up to now, we still have, it was just a few years ago that we talked about the inheritance law and other kinds of laws for women, for instance. The whole issue of property, the whole issue of the transfer of property and ownership of property. These were questions that had lingered on. Now, when you have this kind of conflict in society, then you are not treating people as one in one nation. That was what I was referring to when I talked to about the two-tier state. The other thing I was talking about is the imperial presidents. The imperial presidents. And I think I mentioned at some point in time how we should redefine power and authority around here. You know, sometimes I sit and I realize that there can be simmering conflict all around the country. If the president does not leave Monrovia and go and resolve that conflict, it's never resolved. Can you imagine that kind of work of a president that has to leave from Monrovia all the time and go to Lima and Lofa to deal with some district commissioner problem? We can be in big trouble like that. We need to decentralize authority. We need to institutionalize processes and mechanisms to be able to deal with these problems. Why the president cannot go there or never gets there? We build conflict over time and it affects our society. You know, I sit and even as minister, and when I say the imperial presidency must be strict, it's not only the presidency as an institution, it's also the perception of the presidency by the ordinary people. That alone in itself is a problem. As minister, you wouldn't understand how many persons come to me for job. And when you tell them that you cannot give job, man, they think you have a problem. Because even as a cabinet minister, you should be able to give job automatically. Whether it is available or not, whether there are proper procedures or not, you are minister. What do you think about the president? Can you imagine how much we have been able to consolidate and encourage a system of nepotism and patronage over the years just by that kind of attitude? I think we need more to be done. If you look at our constitution, you look at the appointment of superintendents, you know, in the counties, obviously, coming up as a student of economics and trying to understand politics in this country, I saw superintendents coming to town and spending all their time in the city. All they needed was the loyalty of the president, nothing more, nothing less. They didn't realize that they had to account to the people that they served. There was no link. So they came to town, they met with the president, assured the president of guaranteed loyalty, and that was fine for the job. We need to decentralize that layer of power. I am an advocate that one day we can redefine our constitution where superintendent will be elected rather than appointed by the president. I'm very clear with that, and I believe in that strongly. They must be able to account to their people, and they must go to them continuously for acceptability through the electoral process to ensure that resources and whatever will be accountable to the people rather than just to somebody in the mansion who favors them. We have to change that. And these are the kind of issues I think we can deal with over time. The National Army. When I spoke about the National Army, I made it very clear that I think we need to put this forward at some point in time as a major discussion. And I'm the person who is not very afraid of these debates and controversy because I believe that they enhance the democratic process and our democratic tradition. Now, I know your question is there an alternative? Can we look at an alternative? Certainly yes. What could be the alternative? Firstly, my argument is that our recent history, perception and philosophy of the army is not a good one. We need to change it. We need to work very hard to change it. Secondly, there's $200 million allocated to this army. $200 million. And the comparison I made is that in 10 years between 1980 and 1990, we had close to $500 million almost put into an army. What did we get in return? Even now, with the training of the army, is being trained by a private company. Do we understand the ideological complexity of that kind of issue? Do we understand it as a nation? I don't think so. I don't think so. The army, when created appropriately, is a structure of the state. It's a structure of the state. It must be organized, prepared to defend the state. Wherever its loyalty is questioned, or there is room for questioning, you must have your fears. And I have my fear that there's room for questioning when you have private people training our army. I have a problem with that. Now, the alternative. If you look at the police, the immigration and other institutions, I think they can be strengthened. They can perform roles. The police has this problem of human rights abuses, but it has not been confronted with the extent to which the army has gone historically. You know, extracting taxes from ordinary people in the rural areas, brutalizing them, putting all kinds of things around ordinary people's legs and putting them in the sun. Taxes that were collected from ordinary people, brutalizing them. There was a whole different thing. I know the police have had a share of problem, but I think it meets some minimum standard. We can strengthen it for now. We can strengthen our border patrol for now. And then we can begin to rethink on the structure of the kind of army that we need for the future. Do we need a civilian-oriented army that will be involved in civil wars? Do we need a well-professional army? And for what purpose? Preparing for battle, to do battle with our neighbors that will encroach on us? I have my doubts. Yes, there are possibilities in the future. But I think if we strengthen our police in the meantime and invest more into education of our citizens, nobody must fool us. The key investment to the survival of this country is the education of our people. And I'm talking about all levels of education, at all levels of this country. We need to prepare them to be stakeholders. This corporation called Liberia is a big corporation. Every one of us must have a stake in it. We must have a share. And if we have our shares that will accrue dividends, we will not want to destroy it. Too many people in this country believe that they don't have a share. They will never accrue dividends from this company. So they are determined to destroy it. And to change that mentality is to prepare them, to invest in them, in our people, in our youth, in our females, in our generation to come. Put in place the mechanism. People will study war no more. And I think for me, that is where the investment should go. And that's my argument. I've made it very forcefully everywhere I went. And that is why I stand on this matter.
My next question concerns civil society and its role. Now we know that you've been at the vanguard of civil society's advocacy for good governance and a better society. We saw civil society probably at its height in the 90s, especially during the most turbulent times of Liberia's history. Looking at civil society then and how much people could achieve in terms of civil society, you and others who were working towards bringing this positive change, and civil society now, how would you compare the institution then and now, and what could this new movement, not new movement, but what should be learned from what civil society was able to do then to help bring in this new dispensation that we now enjoy, and what should civil society be doing in the near future, especially after an institution like the TRC phases out our recommendations? You know, civil society has a stake to play in terms of helping to push for the implementation of the TRC's recommendation and also working along with the Human Rights Commission. I would just like you to just give us a little your own ideal perspective on that?
I believe that every group of people, every generation in their own times must be able to define a direction based on the objective conditions. In our times, in the 1990s, we did what we had to do under the difficult circumstances. No access, there was a war going on, the factions were brutal. I recall at one point in time there was a limited voice in this country. I mean, the Justice and Peace Commission, for instance, and few people. We fought at that time. We did what we could do under those circumstances. We adapted different strategy. The evidence is very clear, and we can be judged about that. I think sitting here, though I'm Minister of Labor, but you see that the presentation we've made here today comes from a depth of analysis and research, where we were able to store documents and tried all we could to provide the kind of evidence that will help us for the future. We did that. Now, civil society today. I think with our passing judgment, there's a lot of potential and a lot of good things that people are doing. What we all must try to do is to redefine ourselves in different ways. Civil society, political parties, our leadership must begin to see leadership in different ways. What are the challenges now? Do you have a government that is brutally tyrannical? Do you have a government where there is a minimum access? These are questions we have to ask ourselves. Civil society now could be more professional, engaged in strategic thinking. For instance, I was talking with a number of people. I said, look, the government of Liberia has a poverty reduction strategy. Has civil society been able to analyze that strategy and see where it is going? The government has set up various institutions, the governance commission, the anti-corruption commission. To what extent can we always provide strategic thinking and analysis on the functioning of this mechanism and test government's own commitment to fulfill its role with the people? You have the judiciary. People talk about the judiciary, the cases. To what extent can we monitor the judiciary in terms of the interpretation of the law and the application of the law? I mean, there are new challenges now when you are trying to rebuild and restructure what you have. Those challenges will be different from just documenting, from just advocacy. That's a different strategy. What we need to do now is to challenge the commitment of the government to rebuild some of these institutions. And that commitment can come about, that test of commitment can come about to serious reflection and strategic thinking about the kind of institution that we want. What are those institutions? What constitutes their mandate? How do they function? What are the procedures? What does the enabling legislation say about them and their functions? We need to test their performance. It is time now that we gravitate towards something else and do more strategic thinking as a basis for advocacy. Some groups have done very well. I know there's some groups that are monitoring the legislature and looking at attendance, for instance, the laws they are passing. You know, I think we need to do more in terms of that kind of strategic thinking. All of us, and I've told people myself, that when I decided to come to government, I was confronted with a serious challenge of a psychological and physical transition. Mentally, I needed to understand I have come from one direction and I was moving on to another direction. What were the details? What were expected? How do I perform in ways that will derive the benefit of ordinary people and be a better public servant? I needed to define that. And I think as society goes through these transitional phases, every individual, groups and institutions must engage in what we call self-reflection and move forward. Finally, to end on this note, there's a philosopher who said that there are 4 qualities that will distinguish you from anybody else. The first is your capacity to engage in critical self-reflection. You're able to reflect every moment about yourself critically and be honest with yourself that you're going wrong or right. The second is to have a conscience. A conscience. Now, someone asked me once, you think everybody has a conscience? What is to have a conscience? The third is to have an independent will of your own. An independent will of your own. And the fourth is your capacity to make decisions, to make your own decisions. Those four qualities for that philosopher will distinguish you from the next person once you can do that consistently. And I think this is where every organization goes through. People go through what they call strategic planning retreat. These are important arrangements for self-reflection also. It is what helps us to say, these are our strengths, these are our threats, and this is how we can go about it. These are our weaknesses, these are the opportunities, and this is how we can go about achieving these things in this new environment, under the new circumstances. I think this is what civil society must do more and more. All of us must engage in that more and more if we have to be better actors, and we have to contribute significantly to the progress of Liberia.